Okay, welcome to Lobbyist Training for April. I appreciate the ones who have showed up here today, and for those of you who are attending by webinar or attending remotely, if you have questions throughout this presentation that's not ultimately answered by the end of it, what I'm going to ask you to do is to please email your questions to our info@ethics email address, and we will answer them once we have concluded the training for today. I am Tom Albritton. I'm the director of the State Ethics Commission. We do this training 4 times a year. I want to start out by making sure that it is abundantly clear to all of you that I don't expect you to remember every detail of what we cover today, but what I do expect you to remember is that if you have questions about whether certain conduct or proposed actions are either consistent with the Ethics Act in Alabama or prohibited by the Ethics Act, that you just ask us ahead of time. And I'll talk about our process for doing that in a little bit. I'll also want to make you keenly aware that Kayla in our office is your contact. So if you have questions about any part of your job, compliance, registration, updating your registrations, or making the disclosures that you're required to make to the commission, that you first call her and just talk with her about what your concerns are or what your challenges may be. We are here to help you. We want to make this process as easy for you as we possibly can. So be sure to use us as a resource, especially Kayla. Now, having said that, let's go ahead and launch into the overall presentation for today. What I will do today is give you the basic minimum requirements as specified in the Ethics Act. This is the floor, not the ceiling. We certainly encourage you to go above and beyond the requirements of the Act. And anything that I say in this presentation today, remember, is not a legal opinion that we are giving from the office. It is just general guidance. We do have a process for answering your questions legally and in ways that would give you protection from prosecution, but that is a formalized process for that, and that is not what we are covering today. This is just the basic requirements. Understand, first of all, that our organization is set up with 4 commissioners who lead the commission. By statute, we're supposed to have 5. We currently have 1 seat that needs to be filled, but they are the commission. I'm an employee of the commission. So any official decisions that are made by the commission, and I'll put that in quotes, are made by the individuals who are on the screen behind me. Our chairman is John Plunk. He is a lawyer from Athens, Alabama. Justice Lynn Stewart, former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, is our vice chair. Stan McDonald, an attorney from Huntsville, Alabama, is also on our commission. And then our last commissioner is Ed Crowell, a retired brigadier general from Maxwell. He is from Montgomery. He has served on the commission before. This is his second time to serve on the commission. But they are the ones who officially make all the decisions. So anytime we refer to the commission, we're generally referring to these individuals, although sometimes when we refer to the commission, you may be talking about staff members. We do have a staff of 15 people. Again, Kayla in our office is your contact for lobbying, but we do have a number of other employees who perform functions for the office, including lawyers for the commission and also individuals who handle all of our disclosures. If you have a question that arises under the Ethics Act, there are 2 methods for getting an answer to those questions. The first one is the process that you will use more than anything else as you serve in state government, and that is our informal opinion process. We give a lot of informal opinions out annually. We give over 1,000 of those out a year. And the process for receiving an informal opinion is really quite simple. All you have to do is email us. We've got a dedicated email address for informal opinions. It is info@ethics.alabama.gov. And we will answer your questions as they're received. Now, we tell folks who request an informal opinion that we will get you an answer within 2 weeks. We are generally able to turn around and answer much quicker than that. However, 2 weeks is about the outside that we would be wrapped up in trying to answer your question. So if you have a question that is time sensitive, what I would ask you to do is alert us to that fact. Tell us that you have a need for an answer much sooner than that, and we'll do everything we can to answer it for you, and we are generally able to do that. Now, what I see with most lobbyists is that you have questions about whether you are allowed, especially if you're just starting out, that you have questions about whether you are allowed to host certain events, or if so, who you can invite and what you can give them. That's an informal opinion that we can answer for you, and we do a good bit of that. There's another process, though, that lobbyists can take advantage of, and that's our pre-certification process. So generally what lobbyists want to do is they want to either host or be part of a group that hosts an event where you may invite all members of the legislature to a legislative reception. Certainly that kind of thing occurs with some regularity during the session, which we are in currently. Because so many lobbyists want to do that, we as a commission have made our decisions regarding those kind of events public. And we make them public through our process of approval, which is called pre-certification. So let's say that you want to host one of these events. You can send us a letter. You can set out what the event is, what you intend to give the attendees at that event. It may be a cocktail buffet, it may be a meal, or it may be something else entirely. But you can set out what you intend to give them in that event and ask us to pre-certify the event. There are few requirements for the pre-certification process, but there is one major one, and that is that you must make the request for pre-certification at least 10 days ahead of the event. By administrative rule, we cannot consider a request for pre-certification on less than 10 days notice. So be sure to ask early if you want to host one of these type of events. The other thing that I want to tell you is that you really don't have to guess at the form that your letter should take, because we publicize on our website all of the requests for pre-certification and our decisions regarding those pre-certifications. If you will go to our website, there's a pre-certification drop-down, and you can access the pre-certifications that way. We also have a calendar of events so that when you plan, you can see what else has been planned on the day that you might want to host your event. So I think that's a pretty helpful tool, especially if you're not familiar with pre-certification or hosting events of this nature. So there's a good bit of information on our website that I think would help you through that process. But the main thing you need to remember is that 10-day deadline, because that will catch you. So, the kind of informal questions that we get asked by lobbyists, tend to revolve around those events. They tend to ask us what kind of events can qualify for pre-certification. So, when we get questions like that, we would give you the standard answer we give everybody, which is that there are three mainly recognized avenues for getting events pre-certified. That is, if you have an educational function, which is defined as an organized event, generally around an agenda. It must occur within the state of Alabama, but there's generally an agenda. It spreads out over a couple of days maybe, and there are certain allowances that you are given as a lobbyist in terms of what you can give public officials who are invited to that. You can comp them for their rooms, for their reasonable travel, for meals, and for some hospitality that is associated with the event as well. More often than not, though, what lobbyists do is take advantage of what's called the widely attended event exception. That's a much easier event to get pre-certified because all that it requires is that you invite a group of people with a diversity of views or opinions, and you must reasonably expect at least 12 people are going to attend. So what that looks like for most folks is a legislative reception or maybe a dinner where they invite a committee from the House, a committee from the Senate, or maybe multiple committees. They may invite the entire legislature to it and all the constitutional officers. Generally, there's an informational component to it. There is some reason why you're having it that is more than just purely social. And if you have questions about whether your event fits within those, then I would recommend that you first of all look at the pre-certifications we have approved under that exception. And if you still have any questions, just ask us, and we will help you tailor your event to the requirements of the code so that you can host the event. The third exception that folks rely on for the informal opinion, or rather for the pre-certification, is what's called an economic development function. That is an event that has a specific good faith economic development goal that it hopes to achieve through the function. And so if you request pre-certification of that event, then you would need to specify what that good faith business purpose is that you hope to achieve through the event. We would need that basic information before we could pre-certify your event. So 2 questions. One, does anybody in attendance here today have any question about the informal opinion process? Any question about the pre-certification process? Do you understand the difference between those two? Okay, pre-certification is a different thing from an informal opinion. Pre-certification is the commission's stamp of approval for your event. So what we're saying is that event, at least as you have presented it to us, complies with the requirements of the Ethics Act. Okay? Yes, sir.
So for the pre-certification, does that cover, you mentioned you're covering reasonable lodging, et cetera, related to the event. Does if you're pre-certified, can you cover the lodging costs for all of the individuals that are on that list, or is that a separate, because it's not technically during the event, so to speak?
Right. Well, the question was, if an event is pre-certified, does that also work as a pre-certification for the expenses that are allowed to be comped for the public official? And the short answer to that is yes, because when we pre-certify, we are saying this event qualifies as a widely attended event. The code then specifies, as part of a widely attended event, you were able to give public officials the things that you just mentioned. Okay, so the pre-certification operates that way. You don't need to get a separate pre-certification for those allowances because they're already provided for by the code. Another way to say it is the pre-certification is us simply looking at your event and saying, yes, this is a widely attended event, or yes, this is an economic development function, or yes, this is an educational function. Okay, that's it. And so once we do that, then you get all the things that you can give through those events. The last thing I want to say about pre-certification, though, is that you don't have to request pre-certification in order to have your event. You can do it without asking us to approve it on the front end. Having said that, though, it's a very easy thing to request. A lot of public officials kind of expect to see that on your invitation, that it's been pre-certified. Every now and then we will be asked by public officials whether something has been pre-certified. That's another reason why we put these events on our website, on the calendar, so that people can independently check that. But let's just say that you forget that you've got to request pre-certification within 10 days of the event, okay? So you panic, you call us and you say, it's in 5 days, and I didn't pre-certify it, what can I do? My response is going to be, well, we can't pre-certify it because it's been within 10 days. You presented it within 10 days, not at the 10 days or before. However, that doesn't mean you can't host the event. It just means that it doesn't go with our stamp of approval. Even then, though, we're still able to answer any number of questions you may have about your event. You may say, please remind me what a widely attended event is. Does this event look like, a widely attended event? As part of a widely attended event, what are we able to give public officials? Those are things that are provided by the code, and so we would just pull that out of the code and tell you. So if you forget the 10-day rule, still contact us, and we'll be happy to talk with you about your event. And if it's something that that doesn't fit within those exceptions, we would tell you that too, if you were to ask. So, and again, a theme that will be prevalent in this training is that the worst thing you can do is just not ask the question, because we really do want to help you through this process. So just don't flounder around trying to figure out the answer, or if you think that there's something you didn't do that you should have done, just ask us ahead of time. I think you'd be better off doing that. Okay. I'm trying to think about other informal opinions we've been asked by lobbyists. Sometimes you'll have questions about disclosures and about whether something has to be disclosed. We had a question a number of years ago now where somebody asked if they could, if they had several different sponsors for an event, whether they could aggregate those expenses among the sponsors. We answered that question for them informally, and then we ended up converting that to a formal opinion that I'll talk about later. But so the questions that we typically get from lobbyists involve, what can I do, what exception does it fall within, and how do I disclose that in the proper way under the code? Okay. Any other questions about any of that I've gone over? Okay. The last avenue we have for answering questions for you would be in a formal advisory opinion. A formal advisory opinion is a document that our commissioners actually vote on. It is a public document. Informal opinions by administrative rule are confidential, so they're not made known to the public. However, formal opinions are. And those formal opinions have to be voted on by our commission, so we have to wait until they meet before we can answer your question in that way. The commissioners meet every 60 days. And generally, folks have questions they need answered well within that 60-day window. And most questions that y'all are asking are able to be answered informally in a way that gives you guidance and also protects you from violations of the act as well. However, sometimes you may have a question about whether, let's just say, we have had individuals ask questions about whether they are considered a lobbyist. That requires us to look at the definition, look at the facts that involved in their conduct, what they're doing, and answer that question. And sometimes people have said that they want a formal advisory opinion for that question. Or they may have a question about whether, well, again, I'll just go back to the example about the disclosure of spending and whether that can be aggregated among a number of sponsors. We answered that question informally. The requesters decided they wanted a formal advisory opinion on that because they wanted protection from prosecution, which a formal advisory opinion will give you. And so we answered that question formally and answered it that yes, it can be aggregated under certain conditions. But that's the function of a formal advisory opinion, is really to answer questions that have never been addressed before or aren't clearly answerable from the clear language of the Code of Alabama. So it's really for these untested issues where we're really for the first time announcing an interpretation of the Ethics Act. And of course, the value of that is that it gives you protection from prosecution. Okay, so of those who are here, do you have any questions about the difference between an informal opinion and a formal advisory opinion? Okay. Again, I don't know that you will take advantage of either one of those last two options. Pre-certification is really going to be the biggest tool that you will use as a lobbyist, and most of your other questions are going to be able to be answered by Kayla. Because it's they tend to revolve around how you do your job, not what you can do in your job. All right? So moving on from that, we do have a complaint process. Violations of the Ethics Act are criminal in nature. So we do have the authority under the code to investigate claims that are filed with us for violations of the Ethics Act. Our process is really quite simple, but there are a number of steps to it and some formality to it that doesn't exist in some other offices who have enforcement authority. The Code of Alabama requires that before we can consider any violations of the Ethics Act, we have to have a written complaint filed with our office, signed by the person who has filed it, and the complaint has got to be supported by credible and verifiable information. Only when we have a complaint that satisfies those requirements can we consider it. Now, most of the complaints that are filed with us are dismissed because they either don't state a violation of the act or they don't satisfy the requirements that the statute requires in terms of writing or in terms of specificity. We also have a number of anonymous complaints that are filed with us, and we can't consider anonymous complaints. Now, in the 9 years now that I have been serving in this role, I don't know that we have had a complaint filed against a lobbyist. We have had some lobbyists who have filed complaints against other people, but we haven't had one filed against a lobbyist, at least within my tenure. So I guess your odds are pretty good in that respect. But you do need to be aware that those with whom you deal often have complaints filed against them. And they can be based on what you provide to them. So that's why it is a benefit to you to ask ahead of time whether the things that you might want to do for them or give to them are allowed or disallowed by the Ethics Act, because they may be on the other side of this. And if they're on the other side of this, then it is possible that you could be involved in the case too. But if the complaint satisfies all the requirements that the code requires that the complaint satisfy, then I will assign it to one of our 5 investigators. We have investigators throughout the state. They have a subpoena authority. They would conduct the investigation like any other investigation you're aware of. They'll subpoena documents. They'll talk to witnesses. When they get to the conclusion of their investigation, and then if they believe that it is more likely than not that there's been a violation of the Ethics Act, then what we will do is present that case to our commissioners. Our commissioners sit like a grand jury of sorts, and they weigh the evidence to determine whether it is more likely than not that there's been a violation of the Ethics Act. All right? So it's a very low standard. It is whether it's more likely than not or probable cause. However, if they believe that there is probable cause for the violation, then at that point we refer it either to the Attorney General of Alabama or to your local district attorney for resolution and further investigation. Now, we do have the authority to issue fines. We can issue fines up to $6,000 per violation, and we can assess that against any public employee in Alabama or public official as long as certain criteria are satisfied. For public employees, the conduct can't have been so serious that it involved a number of participants or involved a great deal of money. We look to see whether the public employer has disciplined the public employee or whether there's been no discipline taken against the employee. However, the most crucial piece of information that's got to be satisfied before any fine can be imposed is the Attorney General has to sign off on the imposition of a fine, or your local DA does. We can't operate until one of those two gives us the authority to settle the case within those boundaries. Okay, so of the cases that are filed with us, most are dismissed. Of the ones that actually are presented to our commission, the majority of those end up in some resolution with the imposition of a fine, but there are some that we refer out for further prosecution and investigation. And then once it's out of our hands, it's up to that prosecutorial authority to determine the course of the case. Okay? Any questions about any of that process so far? It's really straightforward. I doubt you'll ever have any contact with that part of our job. However, you do need to know that the consequences for violating the act are significant in that they are criminal in nature. Intentional violations of the Ethics Act are Class B felonies. That means you are punishable by between 2 and 20 years in prison for those violations. We've had a number of public officials who have been convicted and sentenced under that portion of the Ethics Act, so the stakes are pretty high. One of the most notable ones was our former Speaker of the House, who was convicted based on a number of these violations that we have talked about so far today. So the consequences are real, so be mindful of that. That's why it's important to ask questions ahead of time, is you certainly don't want to put somebody in the position where they're having to look at the enforcement arm of the Ethics Act. The statute of limitations for intentional violations is 4 years. For all other violations, it's 2 years. We have limited jurisdiction in that we have to complete our work within 180 days, so it's a pretty fast timeline for resolution of cases. All right, again, the only reason I point that out to you is so that you're aware of what the consequences can be for your actions in this context. The overall theme of the Act is that no public employee or public official can use his or her position for personal gain. And the second theme in the Act is that nothing can be offered or solicited for the purpose of corruptly influencing any public official's official actions. Okay, so those are the two primary themes, and the allowances and the prohibitions about what you can give them stem from these two themes. However, the provisions that you operate under are specific, in that the first one says, no lobbyist, subordinate of a lobbyist, or a principal shall offer or provide a thing of value to a public official or employee or a family member of either one of those two. Okay, so first of all, a principal, y'all know what a principal is, but that's the business that retains you to be a lobbyist or otherwise directs your actions. A thing of value is defined as any gift, benefit, favor, service, gratuity, tickets to sporting events. That's a general prohibition. And so the general prohibition is that you can't give a public employee or a public official or a member of their families anything of value, any gift, benefit, favor, service, gratuity. Also includes offers of future employment. So it's a very broad definition. However, there are 18 exceptions to that general prohibition. And all of your conduct that you're really going to want to do falls within those exceptions, okay? So we've already talked about the widely attended event. We've already talked about educational functions. We've already talked about economic development functions. You, as a lobbyist, though, also have some other exceptions. There's a de minimis exception. The code says that anything that is $25 or less is considered an exception to this general prohibition. The code allows the commission to increase that de minimis figure based on the Consumer Price Index. And at our meeting in December of last year, we increased that amount to $32 for de minimis. That really covers items of very small value. We see lobbyists who do that or who give de minimis items as part of a larger function, or it may be simply something that you do during the session, just a small token that you give to members of the legislature that fall under that de minimis exception. People sometimes at Christmas will give items as gifts to public officials or public employees that qualify under that de minimis exception. So it's not a large amount of money. However, it is there and you should be aware of it because in some of these contexts in which, like the holidays, in which you might just simply want something that is quite small, you need to know that there's a specific exception for that. You also have, as lobbyists, a meal exception that is $25 per occasion with an annual cap of $150 per occasion. Your principal has a limit of $50 per occasion or with an annual cap of $250. That's just for meals. So that's separate over and above anything you may give in a widely attended event or an educational function or an economic development function. That's just kind of a meal gimme, okay? It's a standalone exception. That for lobbyists, it's 25 with a cap of 150 annually, and for your principal, it's 50 and 250. Now, the thing to remember about those meal limits, your principal and you can't stack that, so you can't have one event where the principal pays 50 and you pay 25 for the same thing. You can't get a $75 allowance for that. They're separate and have to be applied separately. The other thing we're sometimes asked, and we've been asked this informally before by lobbyists, whether that limit includes taxes and tips, or whether it's simply the amount of the meal. What we have said informally about that is that it's just the value of the meal, exclusive of taxes and tips. Because what we're really looking at is the point of that exception really gets at what the public official is receiving, or what the public employee is receiving. And so with consumables, which of course food would be, it would just simply be the cost of the meal itself. Yeah.
So does that cover, just to recap, so the 125, that's the de minimis limit, or is that a limit across the board?
That's a limit across the board. That's a separate one.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes people will, the question was whether the 125 is de minimis or whether that is something else, and it's something else. It's a standalone exception. The $32 de minimis is by itself too. So they can operate separately or at the same time. So, if you were giving a de minimis gift as part of a larger meal, you would have two exceptions that could apply there. Okay? But now remember, those are limited in their application. If you are putting on a widely attended event, there aren't limits to what you can spend. It's unlimited what you can spend for a widely attended event or an educational function or an economic development function. Okay, so it's important to know that distinction because in most cases, the reason you're going under the widely attended event is that you really don't want to be limited by either the per meal cap or the annual cap. And you may want to reserve those for another time when you just want to take out, I don't know, a legislator by himself or herself. You may just want it to be a one-on-one thing. So that's why knowing that those are separate limits is important. Okay. Any other questions about that? Okay. Done that, we've done that, we've done that. This is what you can give as part of the widely attended event or educational function exceptions, actual and necessary expenses, and it includes the spouses of the public official or employee. If their participation is meaningful, which by statute means that they're a speaker or panel participant, presenting information related to their agency, performing an appropriate ceremonial function. In other words, their being there is consistent with their official duties. And so what this looks like Department of Revenue will invite, or let's say the Automobile Dealers Association will invite members of the Department of Revenue to talk about, tag issues or whatever. And so they will have them as part of a panel discussion. They will cover their room for the public employee and his or her spouse, and also will have reasonable meal compensations during that event too. They can comp registration for the event. So, and if there's any hospitality that is offered as a part of that, then the public official or public employee is entitled to participate in that too. That is often, certainly in the summer, golfing outings or fishing. As long as they're an integral part of the event, those can be comped as well. Really, for widely attended events and educational functions, the main restriction on those is that it can't just simply be a recreational event. So let's just say you wanted to take 10 or let's say even 15 public employees or public officials to Montana to go hunting. That is not something that we would pre-certify as a widely attended event, even though it satisfies the numbers, because it is a purely recreational event. Now, if there's a conference that activity is part of, then we have pre-certified those events as being widely attended events, because that recreational outing is an integral part of the overall agenda. Does that make some sense? I think if you dig around in our pre-certifications, certainly about the summer events, the conferences that take place in the summer, you'll see examples of how that kind of hospitality is an integral part of the event, or what we have considered to be an integral part of the event. I mean, that can give you some guidance too. Okay? Do you have a question?
I did have a question.
Okay.
So if you have, let's say that you have an event in which there's going to be multiple legislators from different states, in which, let's just say, it's, for simplicity, 50 legislators from different states that are attending, and 5 of them are from Alabama. How would that work? Because it's technically under the 12 Alabama legislators, but,
Right.
recertify that, or how would
The question was, if you have an event and you're inviting a number of public officials, some of whom are from Alabama and most of whom are from other places, does the fact that you may have less than 12 Alabama public officials or employees render that something other than a widely attended event? And is there a separate analysis that would apply to that event? Is that correct? The answer to that is it would be considered a widely attended event as long as there are going to be 12 people in attendance. Okay, it doesn't have to just be 12 Alabama people. It's just got to at least be 12. And we've pre-certified a number of those kind of events, which have been held, for example, in California. Now, it can also be an educational function if it is out of state, but most of the participants are from out of state. So we have pre-certified events as educational functions when a small number of Alabama public officials are going, but it's a much larger group of people. Let's say it's going to be 500 people, and most of them are from out of state. We have pre-certified that too. So what we look at is total numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. I've talked about that. I've talked about that. Talked about that. Again, this is the definition of educational event. Let me go back. You may want to snap this real quick, because sometimes people will get an educational function, a widely attended event function confused. and they will want something pre-certified as an educational function, but it is taking place out of state. And so, a lot of these things take place in Sandestin or down at the beach. That's out of state unless you're going to be in Orange Beach, Alabama. So what we will tell people is we can't pre-certify as an educational function because it's outside the state. However, it would likely qualify as a widely attended event. The widely attended event doesn't have a geographical restriction. An educational function does. Okay, so if it's not an educational function, it's likely going to be a widely attended event. But this is what an educational function looks like. Generally, there's an agenda. It's a multi-day kind of thing. A widely attended event is usually something that is a little more social than that, a little less formal than this. However, there's still an informational component to it. And it's got a fewer number of people, and it generally is over about a 2-hour span. I think it's more like a cocktail party, but it's a legislative reception. So I've mentioned a couple of times that for a widely attended event, there must be an informational or educational purpose to it. It can't just be purely social. What that looks like for most people is they have, they have a screen that is giving information out about, whatever association is hosting the event. I know a couple of years ago, there was a group that had a legislative reception that involved, I think at that time there was a tax incentives bill for property that had been designated as historical, and you could receive certain tax incentives if you upgraded that property or preserved it. And so what this group did as part of the widely attended event is they had whiteboards that showed these projects before and after that tax dollars had been used for throughout the reception. You don't have to have a formal presentation. However, most folks do have some kind of information sheet or some type of displays like that, or a PowerPoint that's just running on the loop about the projects for it. Sometimes they'll have a welcome speech by whoever is hosting the event, welcoming everybody and just briefly talking about the work of the association or issues that are important to them during the session. But it doesn't have to be anything too significant, but there does have to be an informational component. And again, I think you will see through the documents that are posted on our website about pre-certification what others have done in this area. Okay. Any questions about that? Oh, if you're requesting pre-certification for a widely attended event, what we will request from you when you request pre-certification is a list of invitees. The reason for that is that because the code requires that you have a reasonable expectation that at least 12 people are going to attend, I like to have the invitation list so that there's evidence that you are inviting certainly more than the 12 people who are required by statute to be there. If it is just 12 people you're inviting, that's fine if you state that you reasonably expect they'll all be there. However, we've had a couple of pre-certifications where people have requested it, and I will ask the question. They'll say, well, we're going to have 5 people there. And we'll say, well, you can't travel under the widely attended event exception because you have to have 12. So just keep that number in place, and also understand why we are asking for your invitation list, is to ensure that at least 12 people are likely to be in attendance. We'll also ask you to please list your sponsors, because there could be a number of sponsors involved in this. A good bit of what we do involves public disclosure so that the public has a right to know who is entertaining whom. And so the list of sponsors is also important to that analysis too. Okay. So the one thing that I'll pass on, I've had a few people challenge us on the request that you present us with a list of invitees. and also a list of sponsors, and they've said the code doesn't require that. But the code also doesn't require that we pre-certify an event, nor does it prohibit you from having an event if we don't pre-certify it. So a good bit of the work in this context comes from our desire to make sure that we are complying with the Act, because once we pre-certify an event, then, as you have pointed out, I mean, there's very little restrictions on what you can do there. So, and because it is such a big exception from the general prohibition, I feel like it's responsible on our part just to make sure that you're complying with the basic requirements. So we would appreciate some understanding about that requirement from our office. This is the way that we have analyzed whether something is an integral part of the event, because the code requires that before you can give it, it must be an integral part of it. We have said that it can't be a standalone event independent from the larger function. We've seen before when people have had like a golf outing before the educational function even begins, like the day before it even begins, and there's a small group of people who are invited to it. That does not qualify as integral. It's an integral part because it's before the event even takes place. We've said that it must be in conjunction with the event, and all attendees must be invited, or at least have the opportunity to participate, and it must be sanctioned by the sponsors of the event. So there's no pull-away event in this context of hospitality that you would qualify. It's got to be, in all respects, an integral part of the larger event. We have this opinion, advisory opinion 2011-09. Our advisory opinions are available on our website, so you might want to pull these that I'm mentioning because they are some of the few that deal with lobbying specifically, and so you might want to look at these as follow-up to what we're talking about today. This opinion from 2011 is the anti-stacking advisory opinion. It's the one that I referenced earlier when I said that the principal and the lobbyist can't stack their meal limits, the 25 and the 50. We have also issued an advisory opinion that's 2016-15. We have been asked from time to time whether somebody is a lobbyist when they're just coming into the state for one particular purpose. Let's say that they may be a national lobbyist, they're coming into Alabama, and it only represents 1% of what they do annually. In Alabama, we don't have de minimis lobbying, so if you're coming in for the purpose of advocating for the passage of the defeat of legislation, then you're going to be lobbying in Alabama, even if it's a very small portion of what you do overall. So I know in some states, and I think at the federal level, that they do quantify that for purposes of registration, but we don't in our act. This is the advisory opinion 2011-11, where we talked about sporting and recreational events not being standalone events in order to be in compliance with the Act. The reason why you have some of these larger opinions regarding lobbying coming out in 2011 is that the Ethics Act went under a major rewrite in 2010. So there were a lot of questions beginning in January after that amended Ethics Act or rewritten Ethics Act was passed in 2010. So we addressed a lot of these lobbying concerns beginning in 2011. 2018-01 is the advisory opinion that I talked about earlier that allows for aggregation. That's a really large opinion, talks about a number of things relevant to what you do. Aggregation is just one part of it. The reporting requirement is also addressed in that advisory opinion, and it talks about how you report and what you report. The upshot of this opinion is that what the Ethics Act requires is clear, accurate reporting of what you are spending. So if in the aggregation your spending falls below the amount you have to report, the $250 in a 24-hour period, then it doesn't have to be reported. But if it goes over that, then it does have to be reported. And the background for this opinion was that we had, because what we do is public and because the pre-certifications and the existence of them are public, we have had before members of the press who will look at the pre-certifications and then they'll just on their own do research. And let's say it's at a certain resort in Alabama where the rooms are over $250 a night. Well, they'll look and see whether you disclose those expenditures to the Ethics Commission, and if you didn't, they'll say, well, a room alone cost over $250. Why didn't they disclose it? So the disclosures are important because people do sometimes look at those. The code also requires the disclosure, so what the opinion says is you just have to simply disclose what the code requires you to disclose. But in terms of what you are spending, it is acceptable to look at what your contribution is compared to the other sponsors in limited circumstances, which we talk about that in that opinion. But we also talk about events like charitable events where overall sponsorship might include room rental, table rentals, invitations, that sort of thing, which are not directly consumed by the public official. And so in that opinion, we said that those kind of expenses don't have to be figured into your overall 250. Do you understand what I'm talking about when I say the 250? That you have to disclose any expenditure in excess of $250 in a 24-hour period, okay? So that's why that opinion is important. So if you are wanting to do an event with a number of other sponsors, you're going in on a big event, read this opinion to determine what your individual responsibility is. And if you have any questions about that, you ask us through an informal opinion. Okay, that's how all that works together for you. But 2018-01, I think, is the last one where we talked about your reporting requirement or what qualifies as being reportable within the context of the Ethics Act. This opinion, 2018-07, is one of the few opinions we've given under Section 36-25-1.1. Which was an amended definition of lobbying and lobbyists. It really involves state contracts with the executive branch of state government. So we issued this opinion. We were asked a question about whether it applied to people at the local level of government. And we read the code and said, no, it only applies to the state level of government. I only give you this because it's one of the few we've given to lobbyists, but you may have activities that are at the local level, and so you also have a right to know what conduct is exempted from coverage under the Act. And a lot in the Act is directed at the state level of government exclusively and not at the county or the local level of government. Okay, is that clear enough? We have a website that is updated from this slide this PowerPoint slide that's behind me. However, there's a lot of good information on there. Your registration is on there. Your disclosures are on there. Our formal opinions are on there. The pre-certification calendar is on there. So we really mean for it to be an interactive tool for you as you do your job. It's also got our contact information on it. So I recommend that you use that website. There's some parting thoughts that I want to give you, and I swear this will make your job so much easier. One is rely on Kayla. Just know she is your contact person. I know y'all have dealt with Kayla already. She's not been with us all that long, but she's been incredibly helpful and will be to you too. And she really needs to be your first line of contact, because if she has a question she can't answer, she'll come to us about it. But I want you dealing with somebody you're comfortable with and somebody you deal with regularly, and that would be Kayla. Know that if your list of principals changes, or the groups that you are representing as a lobbyist, you have to update your registration with us, and you have to do that within 10 days. Okay? There are very few time requirements placed on you, but this is one of them. If you are filing or if someone else rather is filing your disclosures for you, my strong recommendation to you is that you review the filings before they go to Kayla. We have had filings that have been incorrect. Again, because your information is available to the public, somebody may point out an inaccuracy in something you have filed. We have had that happen before, and the response then was, I had somebody in my office do it, I just didn't check it before it went out, we'll get an amended filing in. That's fine. We want you to get your amended filing in. We really don't want people to criticize your filings in the first place, though. So what we prefer is that you actually eyeball anything that is going out over your signature to ensure its accuracy. This is especially true if you are participating in larger events like educational functions with a number of sponsors, and a good bit of money is going to a number of different things, because it can get kind of confusing. So be sure to review it yourself. Remember the 10-day rule for pre-certifications. Also keep communication with your principal as a important thing for you too with your filings. Make sure that y'all are on the same page about who's paid for what, and also what authority you have been given to represent them. We have, from time to time, have been had to resolve issues in our office because, for example, a principal might not have confirmed that you were actually lobbying for them, and so you'll be over at the State House lobbying for them, and other lobbyists or other individuals may call us and say, so-and-so's over here lobbying for ABC, and they haven't registered to do that on your website. They're, impermissibly lobbying over at the State House. More often than not, you are lobbying correctly. It's just your principal hasn't confirmed that you are able to lobby for them. So if your registration changes, or if you've got principals that haven't confirmed your representation of them, be sure to confirm that with them. So communication is key to what you do, certainly with our office. So communicate with Kayla. If you have questions, ask us as often as you like, but there's absolutely no reason for you to violate the Ethics Act, because we are here to answer these questions for you. Okay? If you make a mistake, just correct it. If you have a filing that is inaccurate, just file a correct filing. We want you to comply. We don't want you to get in trouble. So don't worry about filing amended filings with us. There is no consequence to your filing an amended filing with us. We want accuracy. So just get there with us and let us know any challenges you may have. We've had lobbyists who have had illnesses who have said, I can't register, I'm in the hospital, and we have granted them an extension to register. Sometimes those just have to be granted because life takes over and people cannot reasonably accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish. We will work with you on these issues. And again, go through Kayla. Have you got any questions? Anybody sitting here? All right, anybody who has attended by webinar, be sure to email your questions to us at info@ethics, and we will answer them just as quickly as we can. And I do believe we had one question.
So one quick question. If your only principal is your employer, is it any different?
Any,
As in, like if you're not like a contract lobbyist where you have multiple clients and your only principal is just one person who happens to also be your employer, is it any different, or is it pretty much just the same process?
It's still the same process. The question was, if you have one principal and that principal is your employer, is there a different process that applies to you? No. It's just much easier for you. You got one person to keep happy, right? So, yeah, but it's the same thing. Your principal is your principal. Are you a state employee?
I'm not.
Okay.
Work for a nonprofit.
Work for a nonprofit, okay. No, it's the same process. A principal is a principal, a lobbyist is a lobbyist.
Okay.
So, yep,
All right. Thank you.
yeah. You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you coming and doing this. Thank you all for attending online. I'm glad that we were able to offer this service to you. Again,